Really good.
Good, good. I think last time I saw you, I was wearing this shirt and you were wearing that shirt or something similar. So,
We have met once in person in I
Ah,
think San Mateo, and it's been Zoom for the rest of our
yeah.
relationship. So
So I think it'd be fun to give people a little bit of your background. Where'd you grow up? What have you done work wise, and what brought you to start Curebase?
sure, yeah, that's no problem. So I grew up in Michigan. I'm a lifelong software engineer, computer programmer. I've been programming since I was, a young kid. I went to Boston to do my undergrad at Harvard University, where I also studied computer science. But partway through my time there, I became, really, really excited about using my computer science background to do something that, held a lot of meaning to me, and I became, really deeply invested in molecular biology, bioinformatics, and really applying my background to health and medicine. So I actually was one of three people in my class at Harvard to voluntarily get a secondary field in molecular and cellular biology. I did somewhat lab research, and I also did an undergrad thesis applying machine learning to cancer epigenetics. And from there, I pretty much spent my whole career applying my technology background to really hard problems in healthcare and medicine. I've worked in the cloud EMR space. I've worked in the precision oncology space. And with Curebase, I've worked for the last 3.5 years building our decentralized clinical trial platform. I can tell you a little bit about what I did shortly before my work at Curebase. Would that be a good place to go?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Definitely, yeah. So I moved out to San Francisco in 2015 to work for a precision oncology startup called PsyOps. We were building clinical trial decision support software for big cancer centers around the country, and I got to work really actively on the clinical trial matching engine. So an engine that matches patients to clinical trials that they might be a good fit for. For example, patients who have failed 4 lines of treatment, patients who might otherwise not have amazing options in the standard of care space. So matching patients to those trials, and then also in the decision support space. So recommending clinical trial options to physicians, to nurse coordinators, to coordinators on the ground at cancer centers. So I spent a lot of time working on clinical trial decision support software, working with big hospitals, but also became really passionate about patients. I think I started to see a lot of insights around where the clinical trial industry is going and the huge opportunity in not just connecting more hospitals to clinical trials, but actually going directly to patients. And technology has a huge opportunity to do that. So that's really why I started the company Curebase. It's about using technology to directly connect patients to clinical trials so that any patient anywhere can participate in a clinical trial.
And a lot of people in the role that you were in would have just kept doing it for another decade. What prompted you to become an entrepreneur and start your own company?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things. I mean, I'm first and foremost very motivated by impact. So despite having a technical background, I've never been the sort of person who, works because I really like this line of code or I really like this user interface. I've always really, really cared what the company does and the people's lives that we're impacting. So I've just, been really, really inspired by the amount of value we can drive by reinventing the clinical trial space. It's a $48 billion market today. It'll be over $80 billion by the end of the decade. There's close to 60,000 clinical trials going on worldwide. And there's a huge opportunity to accelerate drug timelines by 2, 3, 4 years to increase patient diversity in clinical trials by over 50%. That actually means lives changed. We're talking the oncology spaces, the chronic disease spaces. You can actually be changing or saving lives fundamentally by accelerating a clinical trial or by making the data more powerful in the research world. I do also have a personal story though. So, a close family member of mine has a pretty serious autoimmune condition. And she does receive information about clinical trials. I'm sure she'd like to participate in clinical trials, but it took her years to find the right set of doctors that are able to help her and that she's been able to build a trusting relationship with. And she's not about to travel hundreds or thousands of miles to be in a clinical trial with other doctors at a university or somewhere far away. So I think in addition to just my insights in my professional life, I do have a personal insight that there's a huge opportunity for people like my close family member that if we can bring clinical trials directly to them, we can actually unlock a potentially life-changing care for them and dramatically accelerate the pace of research.
I love that. And you told me that when we first met. And
Yeah.
we have so many companies that we've been lucky to back where the founder has a personal mission. I think of like Garrett
Mhm.
Lord Handshake, who's trying to open up access to more opportunity for kids in college. Lear, who founded Slice, and his third generation pizza. Dave Vasson, who founded Brightwheel and wanted to solve the preschool challenges for his children. So I think that will carry a long way. And I think at the end of the day, when people think about what kind of company they want to work for, people are increasingly opting for mission-driven companies. All things
Yeah.
being equal, they want to work for a mission-driven company, and it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And an amazing way to
So you
have
started the
them
company 3.5 years ago.
Yep.
And then what?
Yeah, definitely. So the first 6 months were totally bootstrapped. So I had some personal savings, and I was using those to basically build the first version. I am a technical founder, so I was able to sort of rapidly iterate on prototypes of a patient companion app. So an app that basically allowed patients to do a lot of things that Curebase still does today: find clinical trials, sign up, consent to participate, and coordinate a lot of that direct to patient engagement in clinical trials. So I spent about 6 months iterating on that initial prototype, signing up our first LOIs. So, in our space, it's pretty tough to get your first customers because clinical trials are very sensitive business. But we were able to secure some LOIs and use those to apply to Y Combinator. So we were in the Y Combinator summer 2018 batch. I would say that's where we got a lot of our initial traction, picking up our first customers, moving even faster on the product. And that allowed us to get to our seed round. So we did our seed fundraising back in October 2018, and we've been growing the company all the way through to our Series A, which was closed with GGV just about a month ago.
Yep, we're thrilled to be part of it. Talk a little about your experience at Y Combinator. I think people would love to hear that. I always love to hear those stories because I know it's a powerful experience. Yeah,
definitely. When I applied, I think YC was multiple years into their, venture into the biospace with a lot strong. I know that YC has a strong emphasis on things like early stage therapeutic companies, diagnostics, medical devices. So I was not one of the first bio companies. We were multiple years into that. So when I actually joined, I believe the number was that there were over 100 bio companies in total. So yeah, and I think publicly people were giving me advice like, oh, YC's not. The value prop could go either way for bio, but I found that to be absolutely not the case. With over 100 companies there, I actually found some of our early customers, companies in the medical device space and the diagnostic space that ultimately use Curebase to power their clinical trials. Additionally, we got a lot of incredible advice from, our partners, our YC partners who had worked with dozens of other, device companies, healthcare companies. So there was definitely the experience there. And I would say it helped us on the advice side, on the customer side, and then naturally on the fundraising side. So for us, definitely was a great experience, both on getting advice, growing our customer base, and then getting the seed fundraising that we needed to go to the next stage of growth.
So you go through YC, you come out, you got some early customers. What were the hardest things between sort of YC and your Series A? I think people always, we read about a Series A, you raise a bunch of money, life is good. But like the 12 to 18 months before that, it's hard. It's hard building a company. And just talk a little about that experience.
I mean, there's a lot of answers to that question. I mean,
we don't have enough time, I know.
Yeah, one is just obviously that you need to build a lot of product with a small number of resources. We were a 5 or 6 engineering team for most of our sort of last 2 years of history, but we've been rapidly growing the engineering team in the last few months. But, we were building products that, companies that have billions of dollars and can hire teams of, hundreds of contractors were having trouble to build. And we were finding out a way to do that with 5 or 6 people, really broad feature set across the whole, and basically reinventing the whole eClinical suite for clinical trials to be patient-centric and doing it with just a 5 or 6 person team. So I think just doing that with so few resources and having to make tough product decisions, figuring out what to cut, figuring out where to invest, finding out how to do the late nights. I think that was just in and of itself, a huge research crunch, but also an amazing accomplishment. So there's just the product side. I think, of course, you also need to deliver for your customers. There's a lot of firsts. So, running your first, diagnostic trials, your first trials that use different strategies like, Facebook recruitment of patients or, utilizing a new type of doctor. We did some of the first clinical trials in the world that are using things like COVID pop-up clinics to run clinical trials or engaging first-time primary care doctors to participate in clinical trials. So we're doing a lot of things that we're definitely expanding what people have ever done in terms of clinical trials and really having to respond quickly to new data, to adapt the product as we go, and to make really quick changes, be really, really iterative, and make sure that for every one of those customers where we were doing something really new and exciting, that we also did an amazing job, because you have to sell, but you also have to retain and deliver a great experience for every client. So I think those were definitely 2 of the big challenges for us. But we kept our heads down and we stayed really focused. We're really, really iterative and got through the Series A.
And did you have mentors or advisors who helped you along the way?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say we stay actually pretty in touch with our YC partners throughout the experience. When we needed different advice about how to prepare for fundraising, when was the right time for fundraising. We also listen to our customers very, very closely. I would say in our business, it was really, really important to listen to those customers. And my background is also in very customer-centric product management, so enterprise product management, where you have a really close relationship with, in my past, it was, stakeholders at hospitals or users on the ground, like coordinators, nurses. Honestly, just listening to them has been some of the most valuable sort of drivers of our product roadmap, of our product strategy. We're, I'd say, a very, very focused company on our customers, and we learn what they need, and we work very closely with them, and that actually informs our product roadmap, informs where we see the clinical trial industry going. So that's honestly been our biggest lifeline. And then for strategic stuff like when to fundraise, how to hire, we've actually still maintained a pretty close relationship with our YC partners, and that's been a huge help, and our seed investors as well.
Yep. So then you decided to raise a Series A, and of course we're still in a pandemic, and you're meeting investors over Zoom. What was that like? And are there any tips that you could share for other entrepreneurs out there that are going to raise a Series A? Hopefully we're going to move more into a person-to-person interaction mode here, but like just any tips you might share for the other entrepreneurs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our Series A journey was, I guess I can walk through it from start to finish. We came into the year happy with our numbers, happy with our recent customer successes. We had just signed some big enterprise clients, which are really important in our business. A couple very large biopharmaceutical companies, a major contract research organization. So we're really happy with, the quantitative metrics on revenue growth, as well as some big qualitative milestones for us. So came into the year knowing we wanted to fundraise. I'd say we spent January sort of preparing just to get the story right, to polish the presentation of our data, explain the growth trajectory for the year. So really spent January just sort of nailing down the story, use of funds, nailing down the graphs and the metrics that we were going to fundraise on. I would say after that, we leaned really heavily on our seed investors. So our seed investors are great funds that fortunately have their own established networks. They've worked previously at bigger VCs, and they actually drove the majority of the introductions for us. So, we put together our wish list of investors, and we used our seed investors to basically, agree on our story. I've reviewed our deck and our numbers and our projections with each of my seed investors, got a ton of feedback. And once they were bought in, it was, a no-brainer. They were doing 10 to 12 introductions for me to different funds. And, we spent, about 4 to 6 weeks basically pitching different VCs and looking for the right fit. I would say at our peak, we were doing 4 or 5 meetings a day, which obviously wouldn't have been possible when you have to, drive to South Bay and wait in the lobby and get the bottle of water and all of that. So
that is an advantage.
I think
this model is
there is an advantage.
You can get a lot more done.
Definitely. I would say that you can do a few meetings a day. I mean, you shouldn't do too many because, you want to make sure that you give enough attention to every investor and that it's mutual, that you're learning about them. You're not just, pitching. But I think it is good to, sort of get your story straight, get your numbers, then spend a pretty efficient 4 to 6 weeks, meeting everybody that, you want to meet and figuring out who the right partner is. And then, going through the final steps after that, diligence and getting the round closed. So I found it to be a pretty painless experience. I hope that even when there is a more
that's good to hear. Since you're working with us.
I hope that after there's no longer the requirement that everything be digital, that maybe there still is a lot of digital, because it's advantageous to the entrepreneur to get have more time to meet more investors. It's advantageous to the investors to get more time to meet different companies, and maybe the last 1 or 2 meetings can be in person. But I think it's a good thing to be respectful of everyone's time and create a good opportunity to meet a lot of different potential partners.
And since it's unscripted, I'll ask you a question which we haven't prepared for, but what attracted you to GGV?
Definitely. I mean, I love your vertical.
It puts you on the spot.
I love the vertical software thesis, and obviously what's also written on your shirt, which is go long. So I think that at its core, Curebase is vertical software, meaning that we see the entire clinical trial industry as needing to change. The prior clinical trial industry for the last 10, 20 years has been built around traditional sites, so academic institutions, sort of the traditional site-based providers in clinical trials, as well as software that's built for site-based providers. The future of clinical trials is built around patients. So we see that in the next few years, everything that was built up for the old world around sites is going to be reinvented to be patients first. The software, the services, the operating models, and the industry is changing really, really quickly. So I think that we're going after the whole market. We think that we really want to develop a really compelling full vertical software platform for the clinical trial industry. And I think that is that's a thesis that you share, is that when you encounter an industry that's $42 billion, growing quickly, and is still frustratingly stuck a little bit too far in the past, that it's a huge opportunity. And then the long-term view, I mean, I think that I really appreciate that GGV has a long-term outlook, that they're looking for companies that are going to grow over the course of 5-10 years. They're not just looking at next quarter. So I think that is a really smart approach, and it fits the thesis around the type of companies as well.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, maybe to turn the other side of the coin, for me, when I first met you, first of all, I was super impressed with just your knowledge of the industry and your thesis on where you guys could disrupt. I love the mission-driven aspect of it. You told me your personal story, and I'm a big believer that, being an entrepreneur is hard. It's a hard job. It's a lonely job. And at the end of the day, if you're pursuing a mission, it gives you that extra drive when things get tough to say, yeah, we're dealing with a lot of shit, but like at the end of the day, what we're doing is important. And, we don't have a plan B. We're going to do this, and we're going to change this industry. And I love that about you. And, just your grasp of the industry and where the opportunities were. And then, of course, talking to some of your customers, I was super impressed that they articulated your vision. They see the same thing you see. They see the opportunity. And in many cases, folks that we talked to in the industry who weren't customers and not involved also said, big industry, lots of opportunity, but it's hard for a small company to break into this category. And so as a venture capitalist, that's what we look for, right? Mission-driven founders going after big opportunities that are kind of hard to break into all day long. Love it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the industry we're in is particularly complicated because I always like to say, when you're working in healthcare or life science, it's not enough to just have a good product. You also have to have a really, really deep understanding of the space. I mean, you could build the shiniest healthcare product or life science product, but until you have your first user, you have no idea if it's going to work. And often it's not even as simple as getting a user. If you're making a commercial app, you can put that online, you can put up a Facebook ad, see who signs up, and start to get some feedback. In our case, we need to build something that's compelling for users, that fulfills all the regulatory requirements, and you can't even use it until we've gone through contracts that often take multiple months to sign. So I think that there's a lot of moving parts there, but that suits my background well, and I think that it's one of the reasons that it's been hard for companies sometimes to innovate in the spaces that we're in. But once you can get in, once you can find the contracts, you can get enough signed customers to give you the input you need to build this product, be your initial users, and then bring in sort of Silicon Valley grade tech and a Silicon Valley mindset to building that technology. You've built an amazing business, and you can grow it very quickly once all of those ingredients come together at the same time.
Yeah. And talk a little about, maybe zoom out and talk a little about the industry. What are some of the macro changes that are happening? Where do you guys see opportunity? What's happening, in the ecosystem that is positive? What's negative? What are some of the things, we as a country need to accomplish to make this industry work more effectively?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first place to start is just that COVID did change things very rapidly. I would say that the trend towards being more patient-centric and, building more clinical trial capabilities for patients, and being more, our platform is actually, it's called a decentralized clinical trial, meaning taking the trial away from the sites and bringing it directly to patients to reach patients everywhere. That trend was moving a little bit slowly prior to the start of the pandemic. I don't think as fast as it deserved. And then it really, really accelerated because what happens when there's travel restrictions? What happens when COVID starts? It means that people aren't going into a traditional university to get a blood draw as part of a clinical trial, or to sign a form, or to meet face-to-face with a coordinator or a nurse. So pharma companies and regulators were faced with a decision, which is, do we let our clinical trials get massively disrupted or slow down or shut down? Or do we embrace a new mindset, which is reaching patients at home, reaching them through telemedicine, reaching them through technology? And that's what they did. So I would say a trend that was moving slowly accelerated very quickly during the pandemic. You saw multiple FDA guidances released that gave a nod to decentralized techniques. You saw a major uptick in purchasing, and big pharma companies deciding that it's part of their strategy to build something that uses technology and is patient-centric. So everything's been changing very quickly. I would say the rate of adoption is going up, and that's going to accelerate going forward because, much like with remote work, I think that once you've had, a bit of an experience using technology and having the convenience and the power of, remote work, I think similarly, seeing the power of reaching patients at home and engaging them in clinical trials wherever they live is a little too much to entirely give up. So I think the trend is going to accelerate, and we're going to see over the next few years a huge uptick in clinical trial innovation, particularly around reaching patients right where they live at home and using technology to do it.
And we saw the same thing with telemedicine. So telemedicine
Mhm.
went from like sub 5% awareness in the US to like
Mhm.
40% of people had tried telemedicine by the end of last year. So,
Yeah.
and I don't think that'll go back. I mean, people will go back to visiting their doctor in person,
Yeah, of course.
but adoption, now that they've had that experience. And so I would assume in the clinical trial space, we're not going to go back. Like that acceleration will vault the industry forward
Yeah.
by, 3 to 5 years, and only improve things. I mean, there's no reason to go back.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in clinical trials, there are, of course, there's a role for traditional institutions. The patient-provider relationship is really important. So some studies are very high risk, and patients do need to meet with traditional investigators. There's also many types of clinical trials where you need very complex data. We have solutions for doing that in the community setting as well. But I think like remote work and like with telemedicine, it'll be a balance that favors, the most convenient possible setting that reaches the most people. It's worth noting, though, it's not just that the proportion of clinical trial activity that's home based is accelerating. It's also the market is just growing. So
Yeah.
when I started Curebase, I looked at clinicaltrials.gov and there were 35,000 actively enrolling clinical trials. There's now 60,000 actively enrolling
It's almost
clinical
doubled
trials.
in 3.5 years.
Yeah, so independent of, well, they're actually related. So clinical trials are becoming easier to do with technology. We're reaching more patients. We're tapping into real world medical record data. We're finding new strategies using telemedicine, home based, remote patient monitoring. So these technologies are making clinical trials easier, but that's not actually shrinking the market. It's just encouraging pharmaceutical companies to do more and more ambitious types of clinical trials. So there's the evolution of phase 4 trials, which are, trials after a product has actually already been approved in some indication to get more data about the long-term effects. Rare disease trials, which might have been considered too difficult previously, are now actually seeing increased execution. Clinical trial designs that may have seemed unfeasible are now actually growing the market. Other things like real world.
Explain why that is. Why have clinical trials for rare diseases been hard to do?
Yeah, so I mean, if you picture it, your traditional clinical trial, and I might need to explain how clinical trials work from sort of the ground up to answer this question, is that if you're a drug company, you would look for sites. So you would, look for places like Stanford, the Mayo Clinic, UCSF, sort of, really prestigious institutions, and you would go through the process of enabling them to operate the clinical trial. You'd find an investigator at one of those institutions. That investigator would have staff, and you would designate some monitors who would basically engage with the sites and oversee them. So the whole operation is basically built around those institutions. And you can really only reach patients who happen to live within a narrow driving distance of that location. And if the patient is, has some sort of mobility challenges as well, it might even be unfeasible, even within a short driving distance. Or otherwise,
particularly for rare diseases, right? Probably a much harder audience to reach and engage.
Mm-hmm. And it gets worse because people can actually move as well. So a lot of studies, they might be monitoring patients over a really long time. I mean, you picture a serious health condition, you might want to know how a drug performs over 1, 2, 5, 10 years. And people move, they go from the West Coast to the East Coast. And now your life is not built around the clinical trial site. So I think for a number of reasons, when the patient population is really small, some diseases, they only have, on the order of thousands of patients in the country that would want that are eligible. And then within that, not everybody wants to be in a clinical trial. Not everybody's eligible because they might be taking other drugs. In the case of my family member as well, she's already on medication. She might not be interested. It might not be the right time in her life to try that. So I think that when you're going into these narrow populations, when you're doing studies that are long, where patients have other needs in their life, like moving and working and living their life, it can be really, really challenging. So with a decentralized trial, by saying we're not going to necessarily start with the site, we're going to start with the patient. We're going to reach patients directly right where they live. We're going to engage them so they get excited about the trial. They can learn about it online. They can sign up online. They can use the Curebase application, and then they can participate in some combination of at home with their own doctor, maybe occasionally visiting to a traditional site, maybe once a quarter or something like that. I think that's a different model where we can suddenly use technology to reach dramatically more people, and it makes these new types of study designs a lot more feasible.
Yeah. And can you talk about the global aspect of this industry? I think that is a pretty intriguing piece of the puzzle as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that for clinical trials, well, first of all, the clinical trial industry is very, very, very global. Obviously, many pharmaceutical companies are based in places like, Europe, Japan, et cetera. And the different countries have different regulatory environments as well. So in order for a product to be approved in, Japan, a certain percentage of the patients who participate need to have been enrolled and participate in those clinical trials in that country. So different countries have different regulations, and then they also have different sort of minimum requirements of, how much of that clinical trial needed to be conducted in that region in order for the local regulatory authority to approve it. So for those reasons, then just the fact that pharmaceutical companies are global as well, it's really important for clinical trials to operate in multiple countries. And I think that's one of the reasons why with the Series A, we are using it to expand globally. I would say that, most companies, they wait a little longer to expand globally. They might, really want to build up, a certain revenue threshold in the country that they started with, but clinical trials are global by default. So we are getting that process started early. We have done some clinical trials in the UK, and we're looking to expand first to, the European Union by the end of the year, and then move forward from there.
Yeah, that's amazing. What about, okay, so let me shift gears back into being the founder, CEO of a startup. You guys are going to hire a whole bunch of people this year.
Yeah.
How are you navigating the waters around organization, culture, team? What are some of the challenges you're seeing? And I don't know, I think it's just always such an interesting moment in time when you've raised your Series A, you're now going to double or triple the team. And there's a whole bunch of new challenges that come with that. Can you just share what some of those are that you're already seeing and anticipating?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we've made a few hires actually since, securing, well, when we were, at the tail end of our fundraising process, we got a head start on some key hires, and they weren't necessarily the hires that other startups at our stage would have made. For one, we hired a head of product. So, in our industry, again, the product is extremely complicated. It's a combination of enterprise product management, meaning you have a close relationship with our pharmaceutical customers, but it's also, really getting in deep with our many different user types. So, some companies, they might wait to invest in the product. They might just hire more engineers, but in our space where there's this really complex interaction of, working with our enterprise customers as well as having to user focus, we invested really quickly in a head of product who's been in the clinical trial space for a long time. We also got a head of security, full-time head of security. I think some companies, they wait until they're at a later stage. Maybe they're at the Series B or the Series C. But for us, we're obviously in healthcare and life science. We're kind of in the crosshairs of multiple regulations. So we invested early in security as well. We also have a unique sort of model for how we're embracing remote work. So we are a US-based company, but we are maintaining, we are recruiting actually broadly within our time zone. So we're really embracing remote engineering hiring across the country, but we're also embracing remote engineering hiring in Latin America as well. And we're finding an incredible, swell of talent that's coming out of these countries. Many people who have actually been working with US companies and have started to build their track record with other startups. So they're actually coming in and driving incredible value on day one. So we're maintaining one time zone, which allows us to, act as a single unit, and we'll be able to meet in person from time to time. But we're also embracing global hiring and trying to find the most talented people everywhere.
I do think that's one really positive benefit of the shift to, that we saw in the pandemic is companies have massively widened the aperture of people that they can recruit because they're no longer beholden to saying, oh, we got to hire in San Francisco, or we got to hire in Austin, or we got to hire in Denver.
Yeah.
Every company I'm involved in has said, that role anywhere. There's very few roles that we need in a specific location. And I think that's it's super cool. It's super cool because it's making it easier for the companies to hire. It's also super cool because it's opening up these job opportunities to people all over the country and all over the world, which was happening before, but it just, just like our conversation about clinical trial, it's accelerated 5 years. So it's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What about what's next? What are the big milestones that you think you'll see for the company over the next year or two? And maybe even if you take that up a level, what should people look for in the industry and say, oh wow, those are signs that this industry is really, really moving forward and Curebase is leading the charge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there's basic things like just growing the revenue and growing the team. Our goal is to reach 80 people by the end of the year. We're 30 today, so it's an aggressive hiring goal, but we're moving.
Got to dial up I got to get Jen and the talent team to make sure they're on top of that with you.
Yeah, so there's headcount growth just to meet the growing demand we have. Growing the product team, growing service team, and then other support teams like sales, business development. There's also just revenue targets. So we did 300% growth last year on the revenue side. We're definitely looking to exceed that this year. So those are the basic things. But then there's qualitative things in terms of in terms of sort of hitting other milestones that I think are really important for our company. So one of them is around our first rare disease studies. So we're launching those this year, and we're certainly looking to get the results out this year and share that with the world about what it means to run a unique Curebase study where we're reaching a patient at home. We're then having them participate with their own physician in a study that might not have been possible, 2, 3, or 4 years ago. So I think that the qualitative sort of announcements we're looking to make this year, sort of the first, decentralized trial rare disease study by Curebase, the first really successful study in partnership with a contract research organization. These are the types of things that we really want to be releasing. A few other areas are medical record utilization. So we're investing really deeply this year in using real world health records in clinical trials. So we want to qualitatively show the power of not just collecting traditional data, but tapping into EHRs, medical records, and showing that can be driving, phase 3 FDA regulated research. And then lastly, the global expansion. So there's a lot of firsts, qualitative firsts, a lot of announcements we're looking to drive, and then just the revenue and the headcount growth.
I'm excited, man. We're just talking to you in this segment. It's really a fun company to be a part of, and thanks for letting us be investors. And the whole team is obviously very excited about what you're doing. And given our global purview as a firm, we hope we can help you make this as global as possible, as quickly as possible. So it's really fun. I'm glad to be partners with you.
Yeah, it's an amazing industry, and it's an amazing time for what we're doing, and it has a huge financial impact and a huge ability to change the lives of patients everywhere. So definitely the right time to be investing in the clinical trial market, and I think it's going to be an entirely different world in the next 2-3 years.
Oh yeah, 100%. All right, Tom, thanks for doing it. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, this was really fun. Thanks so much.
All right, take care.